If you want to raise pigs for high quality meat for your family, there is no better way than to do it on pasture or in the woods. I'm Rob from Dowdle Family Farms, and over the last 6 years, I've raised hundreds of pigs on pasture and made a lot of mistakes. In this video, I'm going to give you a broad overview or introduction into pasture raising pigs. Before we get started, let me mention two things from the very beginning. When I say pasture-raised pigs, I'm talking about pigs that are raised out in the pasture like here or even in wooded lots. I'll use those terms interchangeably in this video. Second, this video is about raising weaned piglets to butcher weight. The next video will be about acquiring your first pigs and what you should expect. Now, the first thing you need to consider about raising pigs is you need to have a good, high-quality swine feed from a knowledgeable, reputable feed mill. Many people think that you can put a pig on pasture and it'll just eat grass and grow. And this is not really true unless you have outstanding pasture. In fact, pasture-raised pigs tend to require more nutrition than barn-raised pigs because they move around a lot more. Walter Jeffries in Vermont produces pigs without supplemental grain, but he does supplement them with whey from a cheese producer, which has a lot of lysine and other essential amino acids that pigs usually get from feed. Now, let me also say that grasses and other forages will add a lot of different nutrients to your pork, and your pigs will be happier and healthier for eating it. They'll provide much more nutritious pork for your family as well because of those extra phytonutrients and vitamins and minerals. Now, in terms of feed quality, just because a bag of feed says pig feed and it's 16% protein doesn't mean that it has the nutrition like lysine and trace minerals that pigs need. When I first started raising pigs, one feed mill tried to tell me that chicken feed and pig feed were the same. Both of them were 16% protein. And while they're both 16% protein, they're not the same. Egg layers need extra calcium, pigs need lysine and other essential amino acids to grow right. Protein isn't everything. Now, all this to say, you can experiment with different alternative feeds like milk, spent brewer's grains, and growing cover crops and many other things. But plan on giving your pigs 800 to 1,100 pounds of grain to grow out to market weight until you get better understanding of swine nutrition. The second thing your pigs will need is water in two different forms. Pigs will need clean drinking water that is not in the ground. I use a water tank with a strand of electric fencing run across it, but you can also use a board bolted across the water tank. The biggest thing is that you don't want the pigs to get into the water tank to cool off. Now, even sticking their noses in it to drink, pigs will get the water tank muddy, but you'll clean it out as you'll move the pigs to new paddocks. Now, some people use water nipples, and I have yet to find a way to make them work well with our gravity-fed watering system. The pigs just tend to tear it up. Now, pigs also need water to cool off. Simply providing a way for the pigs to cool down in a kiddie swimming pool sounds good, but it's not enough. But pigs need mud. It helps them cool down, but it also offers protection from external parasites like ticks and lice. And when the mud dries on the pigs, they rub it off on the trees. So you'll need water for pigs to drink, but you'll also need water for the pigs to wallow in. By the way, I don't recommend giving pigs access to ponds, creeks, and streams. They can really mess up a watershed if they have constant access to it. Now, pigs will need shelter from the elements, but what type of shelter can depend on your climate. Here in Mississippi, we are hot in the summer and our winters are pretty mild, but they're wet. We keep shade and wallows for our pigs. Even when the pigs are in the forested lots in the summer, I give them access to wallows. Shade is critical, but even in 70 to 80 degree weather, especially if you have light-skinned pigs that can become easily sunburned. Now, for the winter, I just give the pigs bales of mulch hay that I get for free and put them out in the pasture. They'll tear the bales apart and even make nests where they all pile up together. I've even had pigs burrow under the hay to keep warm. I've never really had any pigs in my climate that used shelters that I gave them, even when I ferried pigs on pasture. They just prefer being outside. Our weather extremes just don't demand that they have a barn or anything else to get in. However, they will need to be able to get out of the mud and out of the cold weather in colder climates, especially if there's a lot of wind and rain. Pigs can handle wet and they can handle cold, but they don't do well when they handle wet and cold together, and they can't get out of it and get dry. Now, let's take a look at the fencing that you need for pigs. There are lots of fencing options, and the one you choose will impact how easy it is to manage your pigs. I'm going to break these down into both permanent fencing options and temporary fencing options. There are two temporary fencing options that I'm familiar with. First, you'll find electric hog necking from farm supply stores like Premier One. Most people new to fencing may do well to start here if you're getting just a couple pigs. The pigs train to the electric fence more easily because younger pigs have a harder time knocking the fence down. But I've never used it because I used the poultry netting and it was a pain in the neck to move around. But with a couple pigs, this might be a good option. Just know it'll take some time to set up the paddocks for the pigs. The second option for temporary fencing is poly wire or poly tape. Most people start off with a poly tape because it's more visible. It is a bit more bulky to reel up when you have long sections of it, so I prefer the braided poly wire. Once the pigs are used to it, it works well and it rolls up really well in small spaces. For poly wire and poly tape, you can use pieces of rebar with these specific type insulators and pound them into the ground with a hammer. In ice and sleet though, you don't want to use poly wire or poly tape. Water will freeze on it and weigh it down and short out the fence. Now as we look at permanent fencing options, there's woven wire fencing and 2x4 inch dog wire fence, and those are much stronger and better options. But any solid fence like this is going to be expensive to build. Also, the pigs will usually find an easy way out of it eventually. They'll scratch themselves on it and knock it down, or they'll root around it and eventually find a spot where they can squeeze under the fence because of the elevation changes on the ground. Now I know people with woven wire fences for pigs, but most of the time they still run a single strand of electric fence just inside it so that the pigs don't burrow under the fence. I guess another option is to bury concrete a foot under the fencing, but that's a lot of work and a lot of money as well. An alternative to woven wire is cattle panels in 16-foot lengths. They're easy to replace, they're stronger, and they can adjust with the terrain more because it's in short sections. However, they are a good bit more expensive than most of your woven wire fences. But you'll still want a strand of electric fence in front of it to keep the pigs from rooting underneath it. The other permanent fence option is permanent high tensile electric fence. It's much easier to build than woven wire fences, and it's cheaper. It does cost more than the poly wire or poly tape, and it takes a bit to set up and to build initially, but it works really well. I use a combination of high tensile and poly wire, and let me explain how and why. Once you get a pig paddock design and you know where you want it, permanent fencing takes about twice as long to put up as temporary fencing. Further, the high tensile wire is under more tension, so if an animal's trying to go under the wire, it takes more pressure and it pushes through their hair and their coats, and it shocks that animal much more easily. With poly wire or poly tape, there isn't much tension, and many times the hair on the back of pigs or something will keep the pigs from getting a good shock. Now, rather than creating a bunch of small paddocks with the high tensile electric fence, I use temporary fence to subdivide the paddocks even further. And it takes much less time to move them because I'm only using a very short 50 or 60 foot run of electric fencing. Now let's take a look at how I manage the pigs on pasture, and then I'll show you more about how I use that temporary fencing. When managing the pigs on pasture, you want to be able to move the pigs regularly. If they stay in one spot, not only will the manure pile up, but they won't be able to forage well, and you'll have many more parasite issues and health issues with your pigs. Of course, it'll have a negative impact on your soil health as well. At the very least, I would move the pigs every 4 to 5 weeks to help break up those pest cycles. And I'll explain in another video about this in more detail, but for now, just know that the longer the pigs are in the same space, the more problems you're likely to have. So rather than keeping 2 pigs in a 1 acre field until they get grown, you'll do better off by dividing that 1 acre field into 4 different paddocks. Move the pigs every 3 to 4 weeks, and you'll see a huge benefit in terms of soil health, pig health, and their foraging abilities. Now, it'd be better to divide that same paddock into 10 different plots and move the pigs to a new plot every week or 2, but I realize that for beginners, this isn't always going to be possible. Now, let me return to how I use fencing to manage the pigs. I've divided this field behind me here into 7 different paddocks with high tensile fencing. I'll probably divide it up further in the future, but right now these paddocks are long and skinny, and they range between 1 acre and roughly 2 acres each. Rather than give the pigs the whole 1 to 2 acre paddock at a time, I start them at one spot on one end and then slowly strip graze them. It accomplishes a couple things. First, the pigs make better use out of the forage, saving pig feed and increasing the quality of the pork. Second, it gives the pigs something to look forward to every couple days and satisfies their curiosity and seeking behaviors. Now, people often ask me why I don't move the pigs every day. Pigs are not like cows. They are used to moving, but they don't do well when they move every day. Further, it takes a lot of time and a lot more work to move them, and their water and everything else. Plus, we don't have enough shade in smaller paddocks like this, so I can put them on this end and let them strip graze that direction and they get more feed. Now, I can spend 5 to 10 minutes running the temporary fence across this narrow strip to let them strip graze it, and it makes much easier to run a straight line than to try to add a little bit larger paddock when you're running temporary fencing around corners, because then you have to have multiple strands of wire and it gets complicated. That may not make sense right now, but try it and I promise you, you will know what I mean. Also, when I do tractor work like planting, it's much easier to run a tractor in the long straight lines of a rectangle than it is the smaller square-sized paddocks. Now, one thing I did not mention about fencing is that you need a pen that your pigs cannot get out of. You also need a pen to train them to an electric fence. Now, in the previous video in this series, I described a roughly 1,000 square foot pen that you could raise pigs in up to processing weight. But it's also a great pen to use to train the pigs to the electric fence, and it works as a backup if you have pigs that won't stay in. Now, pigs work with electric fencing well. Occasionally you'll get one that doesn't, and you'll either need to cull that pig or lock it up in a solid place. Finally, when you keep pigs, you need to consider the health issues. Now, if you buy healthy feeder pigs, you should not need to worry about health issues if you rotate them around pastures like I'm saying, especially every 3 to 4 weeks. You will need to worm them if they weren't wormed when they were weaned. Now, I've tried all sorts of natural remedies and people will tell you that pumpkins will work. I've fed my pigs 40,000 pounds of pumpkins whole, and a month later I had piglets die from severe worm infestations. It might work if used in the right way, but don't count on it, and I promise you a novice is not going to get it right. One of the reasons there's such a plethora of information on natural worming remedies that people are convinced that work is that when you have feeder pigs, meat-based genetics, feeder pigs on pasture, they're going to be there for 5 to 7 months. Then they're going to be gone, and you're not going to need to have pigs again for another year. If you move them every 2 to 3, maybe even 4 weeks, you're breaking up the pest cycles and the pigs are not ingesting worms, and you're having a system that works really, really well. But if you were to start breeding pigs, or if you were to keep pigs in the same paddock, the worm loads are much, much higher. Managing pigs on pasture well with good frequent rotations and many other things is the best way to keep parasite loads low. If you get good feeder pigs that are wormed well, then you should not have any problems if you follow my advice. However, I'll deal with more health issues, parasite issues, worming issues in another video. It's just critical to get good piglets. Now, choosing the right piglets is the subject of the next video. All piglets are not equal, and choosing the right breed of pigs, but also good healthy piglets, is imperative. So look for the next video in the next couple weeks. If you got some value out of this video, please share it. Pass it along to others that you think will get some value out of it as well. It'll make a huge difference on the channel. Other people will learn how best to raise their pigs, how to get started in raising pigs, and produce their own meat in a healthy, sustainable way. Until next time, take care, and thanks for watching.